Okay, we're trying again here on Levels Without Limits. I'm gonna try to go live on Instagram. It looks like it's doing it. Oh, it's working. Yay, we did it.
Made it.
Good afternoon. Time round two, the right round. My name's Amanda Marino, and this is Levels Without Limits. And I'm so excited to have this amazing guest, Keith Crosley, on with me today, who's been extremely patient with the technical difficulties. And it's kind of funny with some of the things we're talking about in your book are definitely things that apply to little technical difficulties like this. Like, we can let it send us into a tizzy, or we can just figure it out and move on.
Absolutely. We can live with a little bit of embarrassment and be okay.
Yeah. So Keith and I connected a little bit before we did this, and I ordered Keith's book, which is incredible. The State Within Light, The Path to Enlightenment. So maybe just tell people that maybe haven't followed you or don't know of you, who you are, and like where this kind of all started for you.
Yeah. So my name is Keith Crossley. As you mentioned, I finished a book a little over a year and a half ago that just got published about 2 months ago. I work with clients from all over the world to get past their triggers, to work through their mental and emotional wounds so that they can experience uncommon levels of mental and emotional freedom. And I think so much of the suffering that we accept as an inevitable part of the human experience is really something we can transcend if we have the right principles and the right skills. And so my whole work is teaching people that enlightenment is not meant for just monks and spiritual gurus. It's meant for everyday people, and that there are principles that you can employ in your daily life that completely transform your experience of living as a human being.
Absolutely. But and I have to ask, there had to be something that brought you to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't just end up in a moment where we feel the calling to, share something that I feel like you must have experienced something along your journey that brought you to this. And if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, a little over 7.5, 8 years ago, I was running 8 companies simultaneously. I had over 100 employees and had tied my entire self-identity and self-worth into success and business. And for a long time, that recipe really worked quite well. And towards the end of 2016 and 17, several of my businesses were starting to fail. And nothing I did helped. I was just watching this train go off the tracks, and I felt completely helpless to stop it. And so for an entire year, I endured what was really probably the most suffering I had ever experienced in terms of anxiety and probably some depression that I couldn't admit was there. But I put on a face to everyone else in my life that everything was fine and I would figure it out. And this was the first scenario in my life where I really did not have control. And after a year of just living in pure hell, I was laying in bed one night about 11 p.m. Next to my wife, who was asleep. And all of a sudden, the pressure of the reality I had created for myself just caved in. And I started just sobbing in bed, which I hadn't cried for years. Right. And I was sobbing in bed and feeling the full weight of embarrassment and failure and truly the crumbling of who I thought I was in this experience. And for this brief moment, I could sense a part of me that was almost observing myself in agony. So I was somehow like, I wasn't an out of body experience, but I was just watching myself crying and being in pain. And I had this brief moment of like, how is that even possible? And like, what is this part of me that is somehow separate from the suffering and able to observe it without being, overwhelmed by it?
Yeah.
And without knowing it, I discovered what spirituality terms is your true self or your higher self. And the next morning, I just had this impression that I needed to start meditating. And I had never meditated a day in my life, never tried it before. And the first day I sat there for 5 minutes and noticed how much my mind was just torturing me. And I almost was discouraged because I thought, well, if this is what meditation is, count me out. I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, I used to believe that. I used to tell people, well, maybe you can sit still for I can't sit still for 30 seconds, like I had that, and that means I needed it the most.
I know. For most people, the most dangerous place to be is stuck with our own thoughts. And that was certainly true for me for many, many years. But nonetheless, the next day I sat down for 10 minutes. The next day I did 15 minutes. The next day I did 20. And I built up over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks to where I was meditating for 3 to 4 hours a day. And truthfully, in the beginning, it was almost a form of survival or escape. I was just trying to escape the reality that I was in.
Yeah.
And something very unexpected happened about 8 weeks in, where I was just sitting in a normal meditation, probably 2 hours in, and without having any time to stop it, it was if my consciousness was like sucked through like a corridor at the speed of light. And I was immediately absorbed into the most beautiful light that there were no words to describe it. It was so far beyond my human comprehension that I was just speechless.
Wow.
And in that experience, the light was not just light that we see with our eyes. It was an energy that was running through me. There was no separation between me and it. There was no more Keith. There was no more physical body. It was just whatever the purest form of what we are was immediately absorbed into what I think we call God. But what I experienced, to reduce the word God, like God didn't mean anything in comparison to what I experienced. That was God. And in an instant, everything I thought I knew about myself and reality completely changed. And for the next year of my life,
Overnight, or was it like,
overnight,
wow.
overnight. And for the next year, I was walking on a cloud. I was in the most blissful, peaceful state I couldn't even put words to. And it was the most remarkable year of my life. And yet my business life fell completely apart. And so we ended up having to close multiple businesses. I had to fire really great people. We lost everything financially. And yet it was the best year of my entire life.
Wow. That's
And
I have goosebumps. Those
yeah.
I call it like God, like my divine God, when something feels that's powerful.
But what happened is, after that year of living in pure bliss, the truth is I really didn't understand what had happened to me. I just knew I loved how I felt.
Yeah.
And I knew that nothing in my external world was touching this blissful inner state. But after about a year, I could start to feel myself slipping away. And I was just like, no, like I finally found what everybody wants. And it felt like it was just slowly just slipping through my fingers. And so I spent the next several years chasing that original experience, hoping that it would magically change everything. And in hindsight, I'm really glad that it didn't happen again. And it's because it forced me to understand what were the principles and the skills that I was actually employing without knowing it during that entire year that made that possible. And ultimately, the culmination of all of those skills and principles that anyone can follow is written in my book, where I outline a clear path to enlightenment that the average person can follow. You don't have to be a monk. You don't need to meditate for 8 hours a day. There are things we all can do that truly transform our experience of reality.
Awesome. I know we talked about, there's the healing process. Was something that was, a topic of yours. There's in the world, I'm kind of in many different worlds. Personally, I have a lot of versions of me, right? But I'm still me in all those places. But I have like my spiritual work, and then I have, I've had a personal trauma and recovery healing journey. And I've come from darkness to light in my own version. But what does a healing process look like for you, and like what you teach your clients in your book?
I think people overcomplicate the healing process, and they often assume that it needs to take, years. And even then, you're still going to carry this lingering pain forever. But if you start to understand the mechanics of how we accumulate pain in the first place, you can reverse engineer that process and figure out, okay, how do I offload the pain? So the way that we accumulate pain is we have these experiences or relationships that are incredibly painful, even traumatic. And so then what we do is, because they are painful, we don't want to feel the full weight of that pain.
Absolutely.
So we suppress, we numb, we distract, we basically do anything to divert ourselves from feeling the weight of it.
Yes.
And then what our mind does is it attaches a story to that pain about what it means. So
Yes.
now we're on the mental scan because we don't ever want to feel that pain again. We then form a layer of protection, all these protection mechanisms to ensure that it never happens again.
Mm-hmm.
So what people don't realize is that you live a life living in fear of pain, which means you're living in protection, which sounds like it's a great place to be if you can protect yourself.
No, it's
But
like blocking. It's like blocking all the possibilities, you know?
it comes at the expense of your freedom. The freedom to truly live without protection, without needing to guard yourself, without needing to protect your self-image. And so if you think about those three steps, accumulating pain, you're suppressing it, you write a story about it, about what it means, and then you form a set of protections. So the healing process is the reverse of that. We're simply saying, this is what I should have felt the full weight of way back when, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So this time I'm going to willingly dive into that pain head first and not try to throttle it, not try to stop it, just allow myself to feel it fully. And in that way, the pain gets processed. So the problem with most therapy is that you're trying to solve an emotional problem at an intellectual level,
Mm-hmm.
when the core problem is that you weren't willing to feel pain. So if we can willingly feel the pain, now we can allow it to process through us. That's how feelings work. If we throttle them or we hold them back, they linger. If we let them flow through us, they process.
I can tell you, I learned like along my journey early on, like, okay, this is the issue or the feeling or the emotion or the trauma or whatever it is. And then you do this thing and then it makes it better. Like I found solutions, right? And then I got
Mhm.
to a point a decade in where there were some things that had no solution. It was for me to sit with it. And that was like, whoa. I mean, that is the hardest thing to do for us as human beings, I think, to sit with the pain and sit with the things that some things don't have a lot of things don't have a solution. Maybe there's things that'll, you know, like yoga and I was boxing, I was meditating and praying, and like I was doing all these things, but I just needed to just be.
Just be and to feel the very thing you were most afraid to feel. And so if people are wise, the healing process should do something that's much more valuable than just the initial healing. So
Mm-hmm.
the initial healing will free you from the pain from your past. But what it should also teach you is that it's time to stop being afraid to feel pain. And so if I can learn to stop being afraid to feel difficult emotions, as new things happen in my life, painful experiences, I don't need the part of me that's afraid of it anymore. I will dive into it head first, feel the full weight of it in real time. And in that way, I won't accumulate more baggage in the future that I then have to heal from. So, a whole integrated human being is someone who has learned to feel the full range of human emotion without needing to do anything about it.
Yeah. And that's and look at all the and in my world, right? You know, and dealing with people with mental health struggles or different addictions, process addictions, substance use, food. Like there's so many things out there in everyday life that are you know, accessible at grocery stores for people with addictions with food, for people that over exercise, for people. There's so many ways in this world for us to do the opposite of what you're saying. Like we're almost set up. It's almost set up in society for us to not feel and not be in our bodies and not process those emotions.
You're so right. And think about, people think about addiction, I think, in a very wrong way. An addiction is actually a solution to a problem. And
Absolutely.
what I mean is there's a certain set of feelings that you are terrified to feel, and there's certain things you're terrified to look at. And so the addiction is, again, a distraction or an escape from the core thing. So it stands to reason that if I was willing to dive headfirst into the core thing and do it willingly without resistance, I no longer have a use for the same coping mechanisms like addiction.
Right. Yeah. And some people they don't like, you know, and they don't know any other way, you know, trauma survivors or people that have experienced like they don't, it's not a conscious decision. And sometimes people
Mhm.
think addiction is like this choice, like, oh, let me go destroy my life. Like I can tell you some of the choices I made in my young years were because of the trauma I went through. And I'm able to identify that now and talk about it very openly. But not everybody gets to that place. So how do you think that people can get to like an awakening, like of sorts, without having to hit some kind of a bottom, or having some kind of fallout in life? Like, do you like, is that what you're hoping with your book, is like maybe being like helping people, like we talk about nutrition and ways to be proactive in our health, like being proactive in your spiritual? That's kind of what it seems like a little bit to me.
Yeah, when I coach clients, one of the things I always start with is helping them understand the mechanics, or the things that are going on structurally. So, what do I mean by that? I mean that if I can tell someone that your fundamental problem is that you are terrified to feel your feelings, and that the only way to actually heal is to face the very things that you're running from, which means you are going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel scared. You're going to feel, get me out of my body. If people are prepared that that's what the healing process looks like,
Mhm.
when they get there, the expectations have been set properly so that they recognize it as progress rather than a problem.
Yes.
People think, oh, the healing process is going to make me feel great. It is going to make you feel great after you have gone through everything that you need to go through. So what
Absolutely.
people don't realize is that people that are healed have gone to their personal hell in order to get there.
Yeah, I knew 100% when I was 26 years old, and I wanted to just kind of I needed to address my childhood trauma, that it was no more, it was not an option. And some people, like, aren't ready for that in the beginning, but like I knew that I had to hit that head on, and I wasn't scared of it. And now it's become, I mean, I would never wish it upon anybody to go through what I went through, but it's become a catalyst for me to serve and be there for other people. And maybe I'm the first person that someone can tell that they were sexually abused or sexually violated, or, went through something. And I want to be that safe space for people. And it's my vulnerability has now become my superpower.
And how incredible, that's the true sign of healing, right? Is when this one thing that you couldn't even look at, you couldn't even talk about, you certainly couldn't feel. Now it's become almost like a story. It doesn't have the same emotional and mental residue that it once had.
Um,
And now you actually share it as part of your journey that taught you incredible things.
yeah. Yeah. We have a question. There was ones we're just,
Yeah.
I was kind of highlighting. How does one get prepared for going out of our comfort zone and attempting to heal?
I think it's very simply coming in with realistic expectations about what the healing process actually looks like. And the other thing I would say, the fear of whatever it is you need to look at is always worse than the thing you need to look at.
So
So
true.
if you think about fear, what is the real function of fear? Fear is the mind and the body's protection mode. So in other words, it's protecting you from something you are afraid of more than the fear itself. But what I always tell people is that on the other side of that level of fear, that layer of fear, you'll see something and you go, yeah, it does hurt, but it's also not catastrophic in the way that I thought it was. And
Yes.
so the beauty is once someone does that one time and they sit with discomfort and they sit with uncomfortability, they sit with fear,
Mm.
and then they come out the other side, they go, oh, I don't need to be as afraid of this as I thought that I did. So you only need a couple of very small wins early in the healing process to go, the pain is actually my fuel for my ascension.
And we could even look at that compared to real life examples. Like, how many times have we in our heads, and to answer the question too, Nicole, like, oh, that something was going to be the worst thing. Like in our brain, it was going to be, and then we went and it was like not that bad, or we actually enjoyed it, or actually got something out of it. I can't think of, there's countless times. Like, I remember when I left my career path that I had been on for a long time to start my own business. People thought that like there was something magical that I did. I was terrified. I had fear, but I did it anyways, right? And I leaned into that fear. And that's the only difference between me and any single person that wants to follow their dreams, is that I leaned into the fear and did it anyways, you know?
100%. And think about it this way too. People that need to heal are already in pain. They're already living a life in fear, protection, anxiety, depression, all of these things. So if you simply ask them, if we don't change something, what does the rest of your life look like? And the answer is it will be a repeat of the same thing you've experienced already.
Over
So
and over,
again,
looking in different packages, but the same thing. Yeah.
But again, I always go back to the root problem. The root problem is not what happened to you. You're not actually afraid of an event or an experience. You are afraid of how it made you feel.
Absolutely.
And so the simple principle we have to get past through the healing process is that you started to live in a limited range of human emotion. So if this is the full range, we've got joy and bliss and happiness and excitement and joy. And over here, we've got fear, grief, sorrow, trauma. What we do is, because we don't want to feel that negative, that bottom section of the feelings,
Yeah.
we start to throttle our emotions. But we can't throttle it just on the negative side. We start getting afraid to feel too happy because it won't last very long. We start throttling our joy because we're afraid that if we feel too good, our guard's going to go down and we'll get blindsided again.
Yes.
So you end up living in this limited range of human emotion, and then we wonder why we don't feel very alive.
Right.
And so in order to open the floodgates again and start to get comfortable with feeling the full range of human emotion, the healing process is saying, let's help you to remember that it's okay to feel negative emotions. And then that will free it up to feel the positive side as well.
I think I get really stuck. Okay, first is Oscar. Hi, Oscar, who said I needed to hear this. Thank you, man. Nicole, I think I get really stuck in the loop effect because it's comfortable and it's what I know. And it makes so much sense how we need to overcome our fears in order to heal. Yeah, I mean, listen, we all, like, I have fears every day. I have fear, but I don't let them control me anymore. You know what I mean? It's I'm not going to say it's an easy thing, but it's very possible. And once, like you're saying, once you try it a few times, like that trial and error, and then you can prove to yourself, like, oh, I was so scared and it was not that bad. And I walked through it and I got through it, and I can do anything that I want in this world. Yes, I can.
To show you how this works in real time, once you learn to be comfortable with feeling the full range of human emotion again, there's no need for things like anxiety or overthinking, because when something happens, you know that the only thing you have to do is to fully feel your way through it without attaching a story to it about what it means. So I'll give you a real example. During COVID, my dad got really sick. He couldn't eat or sleep or drink for like 14 straight days. He lost 25 pounds. And my dad has historically been very healthy. He's a marathon runner type, eats pretty well. He's always been healthy.
Yeah.
And so as he's getting more and more sick during COVID, I'm on a family group thread with all of my siblings and my mom. And you can start to see that the longer this goes on, the anxiety is starting to ramp up on this group thread. And I noticed myself starting to be like, oh my gosh, like my dad may not make it through this.
Right.
So I have two choices. I can sit there and ruminate and go through all the scenarios and living in fear that what if dad dies and all this kind of stuff. And for several days, I would have been an anxious mess. So I did something very opposite. I said, I'm going to go straight to what it is that I am afraid of the most. So I went out onto my front porch and I sat there and I closed my eyes and I imagined what it would actually be like if my dad died. So I'm picturing holding his hand at the hospital as he's taking his last breath. I'm thinking, what would I say at his funeral? How would I get through it without, being an absolute emotional wreck? And I sat there and I just sobbed. And I allowed myself to cry without throttling it or holding it back. And the cool thing about emotions is when you allow yourself to feel them without resisting them, it typically takes about 90 seconds for them to process through you. And think about a child, when a child's emotionally dysregulated and they're sobbing, towards the very end of their little kind of cry session, what do? They go, and they release that final exhale. So in Buddhism, the word nirvana refers to that transcendental state of no suffering. But the literal translation of the word nirvana means to blow out. So it's that final exhale where you just release everything that you just processed. And then there's nothing stuck. And so what I tell people to do is if you can master that skill of diving headfirst into your feelings, trusting that they will process through you, and on the other side you go, That's what it looks like to feel the full range of human emotion.
Well, how is your dad now? Did he
He
get through?
ended up making it through after 2 bouts of
Yeah.
pneumonia. He
Yeah.
did. He
Okay.
made it through. But yeah, that's how you do it in real time.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think everyone can relate to that. And I believe like this was another part we wanted to touch on was the transcending process. I feel like that you're already kind of and gateway into that. If you want to
Yeah,
share, these are just some like pieces of your book and your teachings.
absolutely. So the Buddha defined enlightenment as the end of suffering. And when you really think about that definition, that's a pretty bold claim, especially given the level of suffering that humanity experiences and all of us as individuals experience. So the question is, how? Like, how is that even possible?
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of tell you where it starts, I'll share a little story that I use in the book. A few years ago, my wife and I were in Mexico on a vacation, and we decided to go parasailing. So they hook us up in these harnesses, and then they put the parachute up in the air, and then before you know it, you're several hundred feet above the water. So I'm sitting here looking out, going, oh my gosh, look at the white sandy beach. Like, this turquoise water is incredible. I'm just feeling like I am free up there.
Yes.
Meanwhile, my wife is sitting next to me and she's going, Keith, like, what if the knot to the parachute comes loose? Like, what if we fell? Like, would we die from this height? Are there sharks in the water?
Oh.
And so I am having the time of my life, but my wife cannot wait to get back on solid ground.
Right.
So you say, how is this possible? Because if you analyze it, we are both in the exact same objective reality. We're parasailing.
Yeah.
Yet our experiences of reality are completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happening is our mind or our ego is creating a filter. It's literally taking all of our experiences and interpreting them, saying, this is good, this is bad, I like this, I don't like that, I'm scared of this, but I'm not scared of that. And so what most people do is they spend their entire lives thinking that their suffering is caused by their situations, by the experiences they have, and by their relationships. Never actually grasping that it's the mental filter, that egoic filter, that is creating their reality. So it stands to reason that if we're truly going to transcend suffering, it's not going to come because our external world, all the puzzle pieces are in place, everything's going exactly how we want it to go, and that there's no trial or challenge in my life.
Yeah, that's not real life.
No. So it suggests that if we're going to transcend, it means we have transcended that egoic filter that is actually causing the suffering. And so what I teach people to do is how to get distance from the voice in their head, which is the true source of their suffering. And if we can learn how to sit in the seat of the observer, and now we have conscious choice over which thought patterns serve us, which thought patterns don't. Now we're able to intervene at the true source of suffering, which is our own ego.
Amen. Amen. That is so true. I feel that on so many levels. So many things you're sharing, I've experienced in different versions of life, and I think a lot of the people that are relating and commenting, their own journeys. So one thing I just thought that was really interesting was that when we talked before, and you had said that you've only been on Instagram for 1 year, and you have a really good following in a year. Like how did you do that? Like, did you just come out and just go gangbusters and say, I'm gonna do this thing? I know it's like when you are an author these days, it's like recommended to have a social following. Like I want to do a book eventually, but what propelled you to do the book, and what propelled you to get on social media and share this message?
The book, truthfully, I never really set out to write a book, but a couple of years ago, it just became very clear that was what I was meant to do. And the only way I can describe it is it was coming from a place that was beyond me.
Yes.
And the process of writing a book was very tedious. At the same time, it was incredibly rewarding. But when I finally got to what I'll call the end of the search, I was searching for the truth. And I thought, okay, this is it. Nope, that's not it. This is it. Nope, that's not it. And it was only when I finally realized what the truth was that I knew I needed to share it, because it was, most of the books out there come from this very woo-woo perspective about enlightenment. And there's nothing wrong with the woo-woo stuff, but for a lot of people, it's a turnoff because it's so weird or so far out there that they kind of tune out the core principles that are actually there. And so when I set out to write the book, it was really a way of taking the best of both worlds, logic, science, but also the purest form of spirituality, and showing that the two actually mold together very well.
I love that.
So that's how the book came about, is I wanted to share a roadmap that anyone could follow in order to transcend suffering and attain enlightenment. As for the social media, I hadn't been on social media for over 15 years. And historically,
Oh,
yeah,
I take breaks every now and then because I need to. Sometimes I just can't, I'm like,
it's hard.
Yeah, if I'm starting to get like weird and negative, I'm like, I got to get off for a little while. Like, this is a break. So yeah, that's a good.
So I started a year ago, and I knew that I wanted to share a lot of the things that you and I are talking about today.
Yeah.
And truthfully, I had no idea whether they would resonate or land. But in a year's time, we went from 0 followers to over 150,000. And then we've had over, at this point, I think 65 or 70 million views. And so there's parts of what we're talking about that people are really hungry for.
Yeah,
and if you can articulate some of what can feel very fuzzy to people about what the healing process actually looks like, understanding enlightenment isn't this mysterious thing that everybody makes it out to be. If you can deconstruct some of the mechanics of how all this works, people then can wrap their heads around it and go, okay, I know where I am in the process. I know where I'm trying to get to. But without that kind of a roadmap, you just kind of feel like you're wandering aimlessly until you hopefully find something that works.
Yeah, no, you're like kind of humanizing a lot of things and making it really and digestible and actual action steps for people.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Hold on, I got a question. How do you distinguish between moving on and simply avoiding your pain?
I think that it's important that you're willing to fully feel the pain for as long as it takes. But then you also have to recognize when your ego is holding on to the pain as a protection to stop you from moving forward. So there are a lot of people who are in a perpetual state of healing. And what I often say to people is, what is the point of starting a healing journey if it doesn't have a finish line? Why in the world would you do that if it's never actually going to be over? And so you have to recognize at a certain point that your ego continuously goes back to the pain as a form of protection, which means that the final stage of the healing process is you consciously choosing that you don't want to protect yourself anymore, which means you're no longer mentally or emotionally going back to the pain anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
So you say, well, where does the past exist? And the answer is, it exists as a memory in the mind, and it often exists as an emotional residue in the body. But once you have felt that feeling and allowed it to process through you, that residue shouldn't be there anymore. And it means that if you keep going to it in your mind, it's you who is consciously choosing to go back into the past again and again. What does that mean? The definition of victim mentality is revisiting the scene of an emotional crime again and again. So there's a difference between being a true victim at some point, but then if you take your pain on as your self-identity, you've now shifted into victim mentality.
Yeah.
The ego loves to stay in victim mentality because it means you can stay stuck where you feel like you're protected, but you're actually still just in pain.
Oh, absolutely. That was my whole excuse for everything. Like, hey, people that went through what I went through as a kid are messed up, and I'm lucky I'm not worse. And that was like, I literally hung on to that as like my stick in life. And so then one day I was like, I got that divine moment of, I'm like, why am I going to keep hurting myself? Because I was hurt. That makes no sense. But that's a really hard thing to come to, right? And healing, because there's some people that have been through what I went through that are in psych hospitals for the rest of their life. So like, I'm grateful every day.
Absolutely. And what I would say in response to that is, you will hold the pain and carry the pain as long as you want to carry it. But the moment you decide that you don't want to carry it anymore, there's the moment that victim mentality dies and true empowerment begins. And a lot of people who have trauma, and this will be a little bit controversial, but I think it's nonetheless true. Trauma is a real thing. And in the beginning stages of the healing process, it absolutely needs to be treated carefully, tactfully, and with great empathy and validation. However, there are a lot of people who continuously go to therapy unconsciously seeking validation for their pain without actually moving forward from the pain. And what people don't realize is that's how the ego works. The ego does not want closure, it wants control. And so for you to move out of victim mentality means you're moving into the unknown, where things are not known, which is scary and uncertain.
Yes.
So your ego would rather go back to a familiar hell than find out that there's heaven and only have to go back to hell.
Yes. Which is when you think about it from that, like the looking into that, it just sounds insane, but it's just what we've been conditioned to do, you know?
Absolutely.
Who are some of your teachers? Who are some people that you look to learn from?
I think along my journey, initially it was two books. One was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and another was The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
That's one of my faves.
Another one of his that's fantastic is The Surrender Experiment, which is Michael Singer's second book. Those are some of them. I love watching.
He's in Ocala. My friends go up and visit his place in Ocala. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Florida.
I'll tell you who I think is truly remarkable is Sadhguru. I don't know if you follow him at all. He's very popular. He's an Indian mystic that's on Instagram and TikTok. His wisdom really resonates with me because I think there are a lot of people who get lost in what I'm going to call the woo-woo parts of spirituality. But if you listen to true spiritual teachers, Buddha, Jesus, Sadhguru, they're not spending any time talking about past lives and childhood trauma, and they don't even go there. And you say, well, why is that? Like, why are they not promulgating all of these kind of woo-woo things? And the answer is because what the ego fundamentally does is it tries to create certainty where there is no certainty. So people can say, oh, I've had past lives. Do you really know that? Or is your ego telling you that you know that? And so what true spiritual masters do is they recognize the ego plays a huge role in spirituality too, of attaching to things that you think are true, but they're not, you don't actually know that they are. So you're creating a sense of pseudo certainty, which means ego is always involved. So I'm drawn to more people who have also recognized the ego's trap when it comes to spirituality.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely experienced a lot of that. I have one question here. So my question now is, how do you not put yourself in a box with what you've gone through? How do you grow out of that? I do believe you touched on that, but if you want to enhance on that, we definitely touched on that part.
I would say that you have to recognize that what's happened is your ego has formed a self-identity around pain or around trauma, which means to give up the pain or to be the healed person is literally an ego. So to become healed is a version of ego death because the old wounded part of you that has used pain as a protection has to die, which is a very scary thing to do because that's all you've known for your entire life. So it's coming into it, recognizing that the closer you get to healing, being truly healed, which means the closer you're getting to ego death, the more scared you are going to get because it's a crumbling of your entire self-identity. It's a crumbling of the entire way that you have seen reality for your whole life. So you have to trust that on the other side of that crumbling is the exact freedom you're looking for, and you are so close if you will just push through a little bit further.
I love that. I love that. Yes, it definitely is true. Anytime there's a huge crumble, it definitely turns, there's light at the other side, and then I love that message. Anything about, we did talk about overcoming thoughts. how can people find you? How can people find your book? I can put in after the fact, like I can copy and paste like a link to Amazon. Is that what you want me? Would you like for me to do?
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah.
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 How can people find you if they want to, work with you? They want to read your book. Like, how do they get to you?
So Instagram, it's Keith Allen Crossley, and it's ALAN. So Keith Allen Crossley. And on TikTok, it's Keith.Crossley1. And
Awesome.
so I work with people one-on-one from all over the world in coaching sessions. I also do enlightenment and healing retreats. So I just had a client fly over from the Netherlands to do a full retreat. I do the book, and then I also speak at events.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we're so grateful. I mean, like the LinkedIn is definitely blowing up. All kinds of people are saying hello and that they're getting such a great message. We had a lot of great questions and a lot of great comments. Let's see what's up. Deborah comes on. Hi, Pastor Deborah. She comes on a lot of my lives. Learning what the soul is and what the spirit is vital to do. Study trauma and brain, study Freud, study ancient ones who search for peace in themselves. It's so vital. Thank you, Pastor Deborah. She always has such divine insight.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I'd like to leave people with something. So, I believe we left them with a lot, right? We gave a lot, but if you could tell just anyone who's watching that is suffering, right? Because so much of the world is in their own personal suffering or suffering, from external things. Where would you recommend starting today? The one small action step, like there's the micro thing. It's like the new micro habits, So like, what is a one thing somebody can do today that's digestible?
I think the one thing, and not to promote my own book, but nonetheless, it might be useful here. Chapter 4 of my book specifically outlines the healing process, and more importantly, the process of learning to get comfortable with feeling pain so you don't need to live a life of fear anymore. And if people could only grasp that one concept, it's that you living in fear of your feelings is actually causing more suffering than whatever happened to you. And so if you can learn to face your feelings directly, you will all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, I don't need to be afraid to feel anymore. And if you're no longer afraid to feel, you are free. And so the very transcendence people are wanting comes by choosing to suffer so you don't have to suffer anymore. So as paradoxical as it sounds, you have to suffer in order to transcend suffering. But the difference is this time, do it willingly. And if you do it willingly, you'll come out on the other side and go, oh my gosh, there's a whole nother way of living that I didn't even know was possible.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So deep and profound. And it's something that people can do today. And if it's something that you don't know how to do by yourself, if you really feel like that's overwhelming, there's people like Keith out there, for what you do. There's his book that can teach you. There's people, if you're struggling with other things like mental health and substance use disorder or change of life, you can reach out to me. But yeah, we don't have to do this alone, but there's so much we can do alone in our own healing work, but I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for being patient with our issue with getting on. And it was just such an honor and a pleasure to connect with you and to have you share your wisdom and hear more of your backstory. Like I knew your teachings, but I didn't know that I love, not that I love a crumble story, but it's
part of it.
It's inspiring because I just feel like some of us who have gone through some really heavy things, whatever they are, when we get through them and we use them and can channel it in a positive way, it's like we can do anything in this world, It's beautiful.
A lot of people don't recognize that, trauma and pain are actually deeply spiritual if we handle them the right way. In fact, it's the most exponential spiritual growth you will ever experience is to have something crumble, is to have your self-identity shatter, is to experience profound loss or grief or pain. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but if it's handled properly, it is the springboard for transcendence.
I love that. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you, Amanda, and your audience. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to end here on but stand for one more moment. Thank you so much for joining Levels Without Limits.